When billionaire Marcus Caldwell died, his three children couldn't wait to get their hands on his fortune. At the will reading, they smirked as the lawyer announced everything would go to Luna Jimenez, just the maid who cleaned their toilets. But when the lawyer continued reading, their laughter died in their throats. What Luna discovered next would expose a family secret so dark, it would destroy everything the Caldwells thought they knew about their father and themselves.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Luna Jimenez pressed her uniform against the mahogany door of the Caldwell Estates library, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the white collar. 23 years she'd worked in this house, watching 3 generations of wealth accumulate behind these walls, and now she stood among them as an equal, or so the lawyer's phone call had suggested. The library buzzed with tension. Victoria Caldwell Hayes sat rigid in the leather wingback chair, her designer handbag clutched like armor, shooting daggers at Luna from across the room. At 45, Victoria had inherited her father's sharp jawline, but none of his business acumen, having burned through 2 trust funds and 3 marriages by the time she turned 40. Her younger brother, Preston, paced near the fireplace, his Armani suit wrinkled from nervous fidgeting. The 38-year-old had been expecting this day for months, ever since their father's cancer diagnosis. He'd already made calls to his investment broker, planning to liquidate what he assumed would be his inheritance to cover mounting gambling debts that his father never knew about. The youngest, Celeste, barely looked up from her phone. At 29, she'd perfected the art of indifference, convinced that Daddy's money would always be there to fund her art gallery ventures and European shopping sprees. Her Instagram followers knew her as an influencer, but her bank account knew her as a woman living paycheck to paycheck on family handouts. Attorney Gerald Whitmore cleared his throat and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been the Caldwell family lawyer for over 30 years, had drafted Marcus's first will when Preston was still in diapers, and had watched this family's dysfunction unfold from behind legal documents and retainer fees. "Thank you all for gathering today," Whitmore began, his voice carrying the weight of formality. "As you know, we're here for the reading of Marcus Caldwell's last will and testament, dated March 15th, just 6 weeks before his passing." Luna shifted uncomfortably in her chair, acutely aware that her polyester uniform stood out among the designer fabric surrounding her. She'd been Marcus's housekeeper since she was 19, fresh off a bus from Phoenix with nothing but a high school diploma and determination to build something better for herself. Whitmore opened the leather portfolio and began reading the standard legal language. Victoria tapped her manicured nails against the chair's arm, Preston checked his Rolex for the 3rd time in 5 minutes, and Celeste continued scrolling through her phone. "To my dear children," Whitmore read, "I leave you what you have always valued most, your assumptions about yourselves and others." The room fell silent. Even Celeste looked up from her screen. "What the hell does that mean?" Preston snapped, his composure cracking. Whitmore held up a hand. "Please, let me continue. To Victoria, Preston, and Celeste Caldwell, I leave my disappointment, which you have earned through years of neglect, entitlement, and willful blindness to the world beyond your privilege." Victoria's face flushed red. "This is ridiculous. Where's the real will? Where are the assets, the company shares, the properties?" "As for my worldly possessions," Whitmore continued, "including all real estate holdings, investment portfolios, business interests in Caldwell Industries, and liquid assets totaling approximately $47 million, I leave everything to Luna Maria Jimenez." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Preston burst into hysterical laughter. "The maid?" he gasped between laughs. "Dad left everything to the maid? This has to be a joke." Victoria's chair scraped against the hardwood floor as she stood abruptly. "That's impossible. She's nobody. She cleans our bathrooms." Celeste finally put down her phone, her mouth agape. "Wait, what? All of it? Even the Miami penthouse?" Luna felt the blood drain from her face. This couldn't be real. Marcus had been kind to her over the years, respectful in ways that his children never were, but she was staff. She was invisible to them, just part of the house's furniture. There must be some mistake, Luna whispered, finding her voice for the first time since entering the room. Oh, there's no mistake, Victoria snarled, rounding on Luna with fury. This is fraud. She manipulated him, probably drugged him. No sane person leaves their fortune to help. Preston's laughter had turned manic. Help! The goddamn help gets everything while we get philosophy lessons?
But Whitmore wasn't finished. He cleared his throat again, and something in his expression made Luna's stomach clench. However, he continued reading, there is a condition to this inheritance, and an explanation that Miss Jimenez deserves to hear. The room stilled again, all eyes fixed on the lawyer. Luna, if you are hearing this, then you have learned that I've left you everything my children believe they deserved. But before you accept this gift, you must know the truth about why you deserve it more than they ever could. Luna's hands began to shake. There was something in Marcus's written voice, even filtered through the lawyer's reading, that felt different, more personal, more intimate. 24 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I abandoned someone I loved because I was a coward, because preserving my family's reputation mattered more to me than doing what was right. I told myself I was protecting everyone involved, but I was only protecting myself. Victoria's anger was morphing into something else, confusion, maybe even fear. What is he talking about? Whitmore's voice grew softer. Luna, your mother Carmen Jimenez was not just my employee. She was the woman I loved more than life itself, and you are not just my housekeeper. You are my daughter. The words hit the room like a physical force. Luna's vision blurred, her ears ringing as if she'd been struck. Celeste's phone clattered to the floor. Preston's face went from red to ashen in seconds. That's impossible, Victoria breathed, but her voice lacked conviction. When Carmen told me she was pregnant, Whitmore continued, I panicked. I was married, had 3 children, a reputation to maintain. I convinced her to keep our relationship secret and promised I would leave my wife after the children graduated. But I was weak. Instead, I helped her move to Phoenix, gave her money for a fresh start, and told myself I was doing the noble thing. Luna's mind raced back through fragments of memory. Her mother's sadness whenever she spoke about Luna's father. The way Carmen had always been vague about him, saying only that he was a good man who couldn't be part of their lives. The mysterious money orders that arrived every month until Carmen's death 5 years ago. Carmen never told you the truth, and I respect her for protecting you from my cowardice. But she did send me pictures, updates about your life, your graduation, your struggles. When she died, I knew I had to bring you home, not as charity, but because you belong here. Preston found his voice first. This is insane. We would have known. Mother would have known. Your mother did know, Whitmore read, and Victoria gasped. Margaret knew about Carmen, about Luna, about everything. She chose to stay because divorce would have cost her the lifestyle she valued more than her dignity. The 3 of you are products of a loveless marriage held together by money and social standing. The revelations kept coming, each word reshaping everything Luna thought she knew about her life. Marcus hadn't just been a kind employer. He'd been watching her, knowing her, loving her from a distance that his own choices had created. Luna has worked in this house for 23 years, watching her half-siblings take for granted everything she was denied. She has shown more character, more integrity, more genuine compassion than my legitimate children ever have. She has earned this inheritance through decades of grace in the face of their casual cruelty. Luna thought about all the times Victoria had spoken to her like she was furniture, all the occasions Preston had left messes specifically for her to clean up, all the moments Celeste had treated her as if she didn't exist. They hadn't just been dismissing the help, they'd been dismissing their sister. Whitmore looked up from the document, his eyes meeting Luna. There's more, but I think this is enough for now.
Miss Jimenez, your father's estate is yours, but there are additional documents, letters he wrote specifically for you, and evidence that supports everything I've just read. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The library fell into stunned silence. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and rain began pattering against the tall windows. Luna stared at her hands, trying to process that these weren't just a maid's hands anymore. They belonged to an heiress, a daughter, a woman whose entire identity had just been rewritten in the span of 10 minutes. Victoria was the first to break the silence, her voice cutting through the tension like broken glass. Even if this ridiculous story were true, it doesn't matter. Illegitimate children have no legal claim to. Actually, Whitmore interrupted, pulling out a second folder, your father was quite thorough. Luna legally acknowledged paternity 3 years ago through DNA testing. The documentation is all here, filed with the state. In the eyes of the law, you are Marcus Caldwell's daughter with full inheritance rights. Luna's world tilted. 3 years ago, Marcus had asked her to provide a hair sample for what he claimed were new health insurance requirements for all household staff. She thought nothing of it, trusting his explanation completely. Now she realized he'd been building a case, preparing for this moment. Preston began pacing frantically, his perfectly styled hair falling across his forehead as sweat beaded on his upper lip. This is identity theft, fraud. She's been living in our house under false pretenses. Your father's house, Whitmore corrected coolly. And now, Miss Jimenez's house. Celeste stood up abruptly, knocking over her coffee cup. The dark liquid spread across the antique Persian rug, but for once, none of them looked to Luna to clean it up. I need air. This is insane. Daddy wouldn't do this to us. But Luna remembered things differently now, viewed through this new lens. Marcus asking about her weekend plans, not as an employer making small talk, but as a father trying to connect. The way he'd always made sure she had health insurance and paid vacation days, benefits that went far beyond what other domestic workers received. The gentle way he'd spoken to her after her mother's funeral, offering to pay for grief counseling that she'd been too proud to accept. There's something else, Whitmore continued, seemingly immune to the chaos erupting around him. Your father left specific instructions about the transition of his assets. Luna, you have the option to accept the inheritance immediately, or you can choose to divide it equally among all 4 siblings. Victoria's head snapped up. What? He wanted to give you a choice, Whitmore explained, addressing Luna directly. He wrote that he knew you had a generous heart, and he wouldn't force you to choose between financial security and family harmony. The decision is entirely yours. Preston stopped pacing, hope flickering in his eyes. You see, even Dad knew this was wrong. He's giving you an out. But Luna was reading between the lines of her father's final message. This wasn't an escape clause. It was a test. After watching his 3 legitimate children for decades, after seeing their entitlement and casual cruelty, he was giving Luna the chance to prove she was different, or to prove she wasn't. I need to see the rest, Luna said quietly. You mentioned there were letters. Whitmore nodded and withdrew a sealed envelope marked with Luna's name in Marcus's distinctive handwriting. Her fingers trembled as she broke the wax seal and unfolded pages of cream-colored stationery. My dearest Luna, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I'm gone without ever having the courage to tell you the truth face to face. I am your father, and that is both the greatest joy and deepest regret of my life. Luna's eyes filled with tears as she continued reading silently, absorbing words that rewrote her entire existence. Marcus wrote about watching her grow up through Carmen's letters and photographs, about the pride he felt when she graduated valedictorian from her small Phoenix high school, about his heartbreak when Carmen died and Luna was left alone in the world. I brought you here not out of charity, but because I needed you close. Selfish, perhaps, but I wanted to know my daughter, even if I couldn't acknowledge you publicly. Watching you navigate this house, seeing how you treat everyone with kindness despite how my other children have treated you, has been the brightest part of my recent years. Victoria had been watching Luna's face as she read, and something in the younger woman's expression made her stomach clench with dread. What does it say? Luna looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her voice was steady. He says he's proud of who I became, despite everything he put my mother through. He says he watched me choose kindness over bitterness, work over entitlement, integrity over convenience. The money I'm leaving you isn't just inheritance, it's reparations. For every birthday I missed, every scraped knee I didn't bandage, every moment of doubt about my worth that my absence created. You earned this through character, not blood. Preston laughed bitterly. Character? She's a high school dropout who cleans houses for a living. I have a bachelor's degree in social work, Luna said quietly. Night school took me 8 years while working full-time. I was saving money to open a community center in East Phoenix to help kids like I used to be. The room fell silent again. None of them had ever bothered to ask Luna about her life, her dreams, her education. To them, she'd been invisible, defined entirely by her uniform and her function in their daily routine. Whitmore consulted his watch. I should mention, there are time constraints involved. Luna, you have 72 hours to make your decision about the inheritance. If you choose to accept it in full, there are additional provisions that will take effect immediately.
What kind of provisions? Celeste asked, though her voice had lost its earlier confidence. Your father anticipated that his decision might create family tension. If Luna accepts the full inheritance, she also gains control of the trust funds that currently support the three of you. She would have discretionary power over your monthly allowances. Victoria's face went white. You mean she could cut us off completely? That would be her choice to make. Luna felt the weight of this revelation. Victoria's alimony payments had been supplemented by family money for years. Preston's gambling debts were covered by trust fund distributions. Celeste's entire lifestyle depended on the monthly transfers that funded her apartment, her car, her credit cards. This is blackmail, Preston accused. He's trying to force us to be nice to her by making her our financial overlord. But Luna was still reading, and Marcus's words revealed a deeper strategy. He'd known his children's characters intimately, had watched them choose selfishness over growth repeatedly throughout their adult lives. This wasn't just about money, it was about forcing a reckoning. I hope they surprise me, Luna. I hope learning about you, about their mother's complicity in hiding you, about their own behavior over the years, will inspire them to become better people. But I suspect they won't. They'll see you as a threat to neutralize rather than a sister to embrace. Luna folded the letter and looked around the room at the 3 people who were her half-siblings. Victoria was calculating something behind her eyes, already strategizing. Preston was spiraling into panic, probably running numbers on how quickly he could burn through whatever settlement he might negotiate. Celeste was staring at her phone again, but her hands were shaking. I need time to think, Luna announced, standing up from her chair. This is overwhelming. You can't just leave, Victoria protested. We need to discuss this rationally, work out an arrangement that's fair to everyone. But Luna was already walking toward the door. I have 72 hours. I'll use them. As she reached for the handle, Whitmore called out, Luna, there's one more thing. Your father left instructions about the house during this decision period. You're to be treated as the owner, not the staff. That means you'll be sleeping in the master suite, and they'll be responsible for maintaining the property themselves. Luna paused at the threshold, processing this final power shift. For 23 years, she'd climbed the servants' staircase to her small room in the attic. Tonight, she would sleep in Marcus Caldwell's king-sized bed, surrounded by the luxury she'd only seen while cleaning it. She turned back to look at the 3 siblings one last time. I'll give you my decision Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Until then, I suggest you think about what kind of relationship you actually want with your sister. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Victoria, Preston, and Celeste alone with the ruins of everything they'd believed about their family, their inheritance, and their future. Luna stood in the marble foyer of what was now technically her mansion, staring at the grand staircase she'd climbed thousands of times with cleaning supplies in hand.
The afternoon sun streamed through the crystal chandelier, casting rainbow prisms across walls she dusted every Tuesday for over 20 decades. Everything looked the same, yet nothing would ever be the same again. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Maria Santos. "How did the reading go? Call me when you can." Luna stared at the message, realizing she had no idea how to even begin explaining what had just happened. 3 hours ago, she'd been Luna Jimenez, domestic worker and invisible member of the Caldwell household. Now she's Luna Caldwell. She supposed that's her legal name now. Heiress to a fortune that could change not just her life, but the lives of everyone she'd ever cared about. The sound of heated voices drifted from the library, where the 3 siblings remained in heated discussion. Luna climbed the main staircase for the first time in her life, her uniform shoes silent on the plush carpet runner. At the top, she turned left toward the master wing instead of right toward the servants' quarters. Marcus's bedroom door stood slightly ajar. Luna pushed it open and stepped into a space she'd only entered to clean, always careful not to disturb personal items or linger longer than necessary. The room was enormous, dominated by a 4-poster bed that could easily sleep 4 people. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the estate's manicured gardens, where she could see the greenhouse where Marcus had grown his prized orchids. On the nightstand sat a framed photograph I'd never paid attention to while dusting, a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes holding a baby. Luna's breath caught as she recognized her mother's face, decades younger than she remembered. The baby in Carmen's arms had Luna's distinctive nose and Marcus's green eyes. He'd kept their picture by his bed all these years. Luna sank into the leather reading chair where Marcus had spent his final months, too weak from chemotherapy to manage the stairs easily. A leather journal lay open on the side table, and Luna realized it was a diary of sorts. The entries were dated up until just days before his death. March 20th. Luna brought me soup today when I missed lunch. She didn't ask questions, just quietly made sure I ate something. Victoria called 3 times about her divorce settlement, but couldn't spare 10 minutes to visit. The irony isn't lost on me that my most caring child is the one I've never officially acknowledged. March 25th. Caught Preston searching my office last night. He's desperate, thinks I don't know about the gambling debts. If he'd just talked to me, I would have helped him get treatment. Instead, he schemes and plots, assuming I'm a fool who doesn't monitor his trust fund withdrawals. April 2nd. Celeste brought her new boyfriend to dinner, some influencer with face tattoos who kept taking pictures of the artwork. She introduced me as her boring old dad and spent the entire meal posting on social media. Luna served silently, professionally, but I saw the sadness in her eyes. She knows what family should look like, and this isn't it. Luna closed the journal, overwhelmed by her father's private thoughts. He'd been watching all of them, measuring their characters against each other, and she'd apparently been the only one who'd passed his tests without even knowing she was being tested. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, then caught herself. This was her room now. She didn't need permission to be here. Victoria entered, having traded her designer dress for jeans and a sweater. She looked younger somehow, more vulnerable without her usual armor of expensive clothing and perfect makeup. "We need to talk," Victoria said, settling uninvited into the chair across from Luna. "I'm listening." Victoria studied her hands for a moment before speaking. "I was 12 when you were born. Old enough to remember when Dad started working late all the time, when Mom started drinking more wine at dinner, when the house felt like a battlefield disguised as a happy home." Luna remained silent, sensing this was important. I knew something was wrong, but I thought it was my fault somehow. Kids do that, you know, blame themselves for their parents' problems. I spent my teenage years trying to be perfect. Perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect daughter, thinking I could fix whatever was broken in our family. "Victoria?" "Let me finish." Victoria's voice cracked slightly. "I failed, obviously. 3 failed marriages, 2 bankruptcies, and a prescription drug problem I've been hiding for 6 years. I kept thinking if I could just get enough money, find the right man, buy the right things, I could create the perfect life that would finally make Dad proud of me. Luna felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for the woman who'd treated her like furniture for over 2 decades. The truth is, Victoria continued, I've been jealous of you for years. Not because I knew you were Dad's daughter, but because you seemed so content. You never appeared to want more than what you had. You were kind to everyone, even when we were awful to you. You had something I've spent 45 years trying to buy. What's that? Peace, genuine happiness, the ability to be proud of who you are instead of what you own. Before Luna could respond, Preston appeared in the doorway. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his usually perfect hair disheveled. "Are we having a family meeting without me?" he asked, though his usual sarcasm was absent. Victoria gestured for him to join them. Preston collapsed into another chair, suddenly looking older than his 38 years. "I've been thinking about what Dad wrote," he said quietly, "about us being products of a loveless marriage. He wasn't wrong. Mom and Dad barely spoke to each other unless they were fighting. We learned that love was conditional, that worth was measured in dollars and achievements." Luna watched her half-brother carefully. This was a side of Preston she'd never seen before. Vulnerable, reflective, almost broken. "I started gambling because it was the only time I felt truly alive," he continued. "The risk, the adrenaline, the possibility that one big win could solve all my problems. But it never did. It just created bigger problems, bigger debts, bigger lies to tell myself and everyone else." "How much do you owe?" Luna asked gently. Preston laughed bitterly. $2.7 million, last time I calculated. Spread across 12 different creditors, some of whom aren't the type to accept payment plans. The number hit Luna like a physical blow. Preston's trust fund generated about $30,000 per month. It would take him decades to pay off that kind of debt, assuming he could stop gambling entirely.
The worst part, Preston continued, is that I knew Dad would have helped me if I'd just been honest, but I was too ashamed, too proud, too convinced that admitting I had a problem would make me look weak. Celeste appeared in the doorway, having apparently abandoned her phone for the first time in years. She looked young and lost without the constant digital distraction. "Did you guys know that Mom knew about Luna the whole time?" she asked, settling on the edge of the bed. "I've been thinking about all those times Mom would make snide comments about the help getting above their station or people who don't know their place. She wasn't just being classist, she was being cruel to Dad's daughter, right in front of him." The room fell silent as they all processed the implications of Margaret Caldwell's behavior. Luna thought about all the times Marcus's wife had spoken to her with barely concealed hostility, finding fault with her work that other household staff praised. "She made your life hell on purpose," Victoria realized, "because hurting you was the only way she could hurt Dad for his affair." Luna felt a strange mixture of anger and pity for the woman who'd made her working life so difficult. Margaret had been trapped in her own way, married to a man who loved someone else, watching that man's secret daughter live under her roof every day. "The question is," Celeste said, "what happens now? Luna, you hold all the cards. You could destroy us financially, and honestly, we'd probably deserve it after how we've treated you." Luna looked around at the three people who were her family. Dysfunctional, damaged, but undeniably her blood. They were all staring at her with expressions she'd never seen before: respect, hope, and genuine curiosity about who she really was beneath the uniform they'd used to define her. "I have an idea," Luna said slowly, "but you're not going to like it." The three siblings stared at Luna with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Outside, the storm that had been brewing all afternoon finally broke, sending sheets of rain against the bedroom windows. "My idea," Luna began, standing and walking to the window, "involves all of us working for something bigger than ourselves. Dad wrote that he hoped learning the truth would make you better people. I want to give you that chance." Preston shifted uncomfortably. "What kind of work are we talking about?" Luna turned back to face them, her expression serious. "I accept the full inheritance,
But instead of cutting you off or dividing it equally, we use Dad's money to build something meaningful. The community center I mentioned, we expand that vision, create a foundation that actually helps people instead of just making us feel good about ourselves. Victoria frowned. You want us to become philanthropists? I want you to earn your inheritance, Luna corrected. Dad left me everything because he believed I understood the value of hard work and genuine compassion. You can prove him wrong about you, but you'll have to actually change, not just talk about changing. Celeste sat up straighter. What does that look like practically? Luna had clearly been thinking about this during her time alone. Victoria, you mentioned struggling with addiction. You'll run our substance abuse program, not from behind a desk writing checks, but actually counseling people, attending meetings, sharing your story. Your trust fund continues, but it's tied to your sobriety and your genuine participation in recovery. Victoria's face went pale. You want me to admit publicly that I'm an addict? I want you to stop pretending you're not one. Dad knew, by the way. It's in his diary. He was waiting for you to ask for help instead of hiding behind designer clothes and charity dollars. The words hit Victoria like a slap. She thought she'd been so careful, so discreet with her prescription drug use. Learning that her father had known all along and chosen to wait rather than intervene was almost more painful than losing the inheritance. Preston, Luna continued, you'll head our financial literacy program. Teach people how to manage money, avoid debt, make smart investments. But first, you're going to rehab for gambling addiction. Real treatment, not some luxury spa where you can still place bets from your private room. Preston laughed harshly. You want the guy who lost millions to teach other people about money management? I want the guy who understands how easy it is to destroy your life with bad financial decisions to help others avoid the same mistakes. Your creditors get paid off, but your trust fund gets restructured into performance-based payments tied to your recovery progress and program success. And me? Celeste asked, though her voice suggested she already dreaded the answer. You'll run our youth programs, actually mentor kids, not just post Instagram photos with them for content. Help teenagers who are aging out of foster care, kids from broken homes, young people who need to see that there are adults who actually care about their futures. Luna walked back to the center of the room, commanding attention in a way that reminded all of them unmistakably of their father.
Here's the catch, she continued. This isn't a job you can quit when it gets hard or boring. Your trust funds are permanently tied to the foundation's success and your genuine participation. If you're not putting in real effort, if you're just going through the motions, the payments stop forever. The room fell silent, except for the rain beating against the windows. Luna was essentially offering them a chance to rebuild their lives, but only if they were willing to abandon everything they'd been before. What about you? Victoria asked finally. What's your role in this foundation? I'll oversee everything and work directly with families in crisis, but I'm also going back to school for my master's degree in social work. Dad's money gives me the freedom to focus on education and actually helping people instead of just surviving. Preston ran his hands through his hair. This is insane. You're asking us to completely restructure our lives, air our personal problems in public, and work actual jobs for the first time in our adult lives. Yes, Luna said simply. And if we refuse? Then you get exactly what Dad originally planned to leave you. Nothing but your assumptions about yourselves. I'll run the foundation alone, your trust funds disappear, and you figure out how to support yourselves like adults. Celeste stood up abruptly and began pacing. You're blackmailing us into becoming decent human beings. I'm offering you the chance to become the people Dad hoped you could be. The choice is entirely yours. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I've been taking pills for 6 years. I started with prescription painkillers after my second divorce, moved on to whatever I could get. Some days I take 20 pills just to feel normal. The admission hung in the air like a confession in church. Preston and Celeste stared at their sister, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. I'm scared, Victoria continued. Scared of being sober. Scared of facing my problems without something to numb the pain. Scared of admitting to the world that I'm not the put-together woman I pretend to be. Luna sat down next to Victoria on the bed, the gesture both sisterly and compassionate. Fear means you're taking it seriously. That's a good sign. Preston was next. Those creditors I mentioned, some of them aren't legitimate businesses. I owe money to people who break legs when payments are late. I've been dodging phone calls and changing hotels for 3 weeks because I'm genuinely afraid they might hurt me. We'll pay them off, Luna said matter-of-factly. All of them. But Preston, if you gamble again, even once, you're on your own. I won't enable your addiction the way Dad enabled all of our dysfunction by giving us money without requiring anything in return. Celeste stopped pacing and turned to face them. I don't know how to do anything real. I've been playing pretend for so long that I don't know who I actually am underneath all the performance. The thought of working with kids who might actually need something from me terrifies me because I don't know if I have anything genuine to give. Then you'll learn, Luna said gently. We'll all learn together. The rain was slowing, and shafts of late afternoon sunlight were beginning to break through the clouds. Luna looked around at her 3 siblings, seeing them not as the entitled monsters she'd resented for years, but as damaged people who'd never learned how to be anything else. There's something else Dad left, she said, reaching into the nightstand drawer. She pulled out 3 sealed envelopes, each marked with a sibling's name. Personal letters for each of you. I haven't read them, but I suspect they'll help you understand why he structured things this way. Victoria took her envelope with shaking hands. Preston accepted his with a grimace. Celeste held hers like it might explode. You have until tomorrow morning to decide, Luna said, standing up. If you choose to accept my terms, we start immediately. Victoria checks into rehab by the end of the week. Preston meets with a gambling addiction counselor. Celeste enrolls in child development courses. And we begin building something that would make Dad proud of all of us. As Luna headed for the door, Victoria called out, "What if we can't do it? What if we fail?" Luna paused at the threshold, her hand on the doorknob. Then you fail. But at least you'll fail while trying to become better people instead of failing while staying exactly the same. She left them alone with their letters and their choices, walking down the main staircase of her house for the 2nd time in her life, but this time as its rightful owner. That evening, Luna found herself in the mansion's kitchen for the first time as anything other than staff. The industrial-grade appliances that she'd maintained for years now belonged to her, along with the marble countertops she'd polished countless times and the custom cabinets she'd organized according to the family's preferences. She opened the refrigerator, stocked with ingredients she'd bought just yesterday for meals she'd never eat with the family. The irony wasn't lost on her. She knew this kitchen better than anyone, but had never been invited to sit at the breakfast table she'd set every morning for over 2 decades. Her phone buzzed with another text from Maria. "Girl, you're scaring me with the silence. Call me or I'm driving over there." Luna stared at the message, realizing she still hadn't figured out how to explain any of this. How do you tell your best friend that you discovered you were secretly rich, that your employer was actually your father, and that you now held the financial futures of 3 adults in your hands? Before she could decide whether to call Maria back, she heard footsteps on the marble floor. Celeste appeared in the doorway, looking smaller somehow in jeans and a plain t-shirt instead of her usual designer outfits. "I read Dad's letter," Celeste said quietly, holding up the opened envelope. "Mind if I sit?" Luna gestured to the kitchen island where she'd served the family countless meals. Of course. Celeste climbed onto one of the high stools, a movement that seemed strange and vulnerable. Luna had never seen any of the siblings in the kitchen before. It had always been her domain, her responsibility. "He knew about the fake engagement," Celeste said without preamble. Luna frowned. What fake engagement?
6 months ago, I hired an actor to pretend to be my fiancé, posted all over social media about how happy I was, how perfect he was, how we were planning this elaborate wedding. I thought it would make Dad proud, seeing me settle down with someone successful. Luna poured herself a glass of water, processing this information. What happened? The guy got greedy, started demanding more money to keep up the charade. Dad figured it out when he hired a private investigator to do a background check for wedding security. Turns out my perfect fiancé had a criminal record and 3 other fake girlfriends he was scamming. Celeste laughed bitterly, running her fingers through her hair. Dad wrote that he wasn't angry about the fake relationship. He was heartbroken that I thought I needed to lie to earn his love. He said he would have been proud of me for being honest about being single and working on myself instead of creating elaborate fantasies. Luna sat down across from her half-sister, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Without the constant phone, the designer clothes, and the performative confidence, Celeste looked like what she actually was, a lost 29-year-old who'd never learned how to be authentic. "There's more," Celeste continued. "He knew about the credit card debt, the failed business ventures, the fact that I haven't actually sold a single piece of art from my gallery in 8 months. Everything I've told him about my success was a lie, and he knew it all. But he kept giving you money anyway. That's what makes it worse. He wrote that he was enabling my dishonesty because it was easier than confronting me about my problems. He said he failed me as a father by never teaching me that love doesn't have to be earned through achievement." Luna felt a pang of sympathy for her father, imagining him watching his children struggle while feeling helpless to truly help them. His wealth had become a barrier rather than a blessing, allowing them to avoid consequences without addressing root causes. What else did the letter say? Celeste pulled out several pages of Marcus's careful handwriting. He wrote about watching me with the household staff over the years, how I treated the gardeners, the cleaning crew, and the cook. He said I was always polite to their faces, but would complain about them constantly afterward, finding fault with everything they did. Luna remembered those conversations, Celeste talking to her friends about how the help was incompetent, unreliable, impossible to manage. She'd always been careful to speak Spanish around Celeste when discussing personal matters, assuming the younger one wouldn't understand or care enough to learn. "He said you were the opposite," Celeste continued, "that you knew everyone's names, asked about their families, helped them when they were struggling. When the gardener's son broke his leg, you organized a meal train among all the staff to help his family. When the cook's mother was sick, you covered her shifts without being asked." Luna had never thought of those actions as particularly noteworthy. They were just the right things to do when people you cared about were in trouble. Dad wrote that he was ashamed of how his legitimate children treated people, especially compared to how you treated everyone. He said watching me be casually cruel to good people while you were consistently kind made him realize he'd raised monsters. The word hung heavy in the air. Monsters, not a term any parent uses lightly about their children. He called us monsters? He called our behavior monstrous. There's a difference, but barely. Celeste folded the letter carefully. He said he still loved us, but he'd failed to teach us basic human decency, and that failure was his greatest regret. Luna heard more footsteps and looked up to see Preston entering the kitchen. His usual swagger was completely absent, replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. "Victoria's having a breakdown," he announced without preamble. "She's locked herself in her room and won't come out. I think reading Dad's letter pushed her over the edge." Celeste jumped down from her stool. "What did it say?" Preston slumped against the counter, looking exhausted. "I don't know exactly, but she's been crying for 2 hours and keeps saying he knew everything over and over." Luna felt a stab of concern. Despite everything Victoria had put her through over the years, she didn't want her half-sister to have a complete mental breakdown. "Should we call someone?" Celeste asked. "A doctor, maybe?" "She won't let anyone in," Preston said. "I tried talking to her through the door, but she just keeps apologizing to someone who isn't there." Luna stood up decisively. "I'll try talking to her." Both siblings stared at her. "Why would she listen to you?" Preston asked, though not unkindly. Because I'm not her competition anymore, Luna replied. For the first time in our lives, we're on equal footing. She doesn't have to perform for me or compete with me. Maybe that'll make a difference. As they walked upstairs together, Luna realized this was the first time she'd ever seen Preston and Celeste genuinely worried about their sister's well-being, rather than just annoyed by her drama. Crisis had a way of clarifying priorities. Victoria's bedroom door was indeed locked, and they could hear muffled sobbing from inside. "Victoria," Luna called out gently, "it's me. Can we talk?" The crying stopped abruptly. After a long moment, Victoria's voice came through the door, thick with tears and barely recognizable. "Go away, Luna. You don't want to deal with my mess." "Actually, I do. That's what sisters are for." Another silence, then the sound of the lock turning. Victoria opened the door just wide enough for Luna to see her face, red, swollen, stripped of all makeup and pretense. She looked nothing like the polished socialite who dominated family dinners with stories about charity galas and shopping trips. "He knew about David," Victoria whispered. Luna didn't know who David was, but she nodded encouragingly. "My first husband. Dad knew why the marriage really ended, knew what David did to me, knew why I started taking pills in the first place." Victoria's voice broke on the last words. Luna felt her heart clench. She was beginning to understand why Marcus's letter had destroyed Victoria so completely. "Can I come in?" Luna asked softly. Victoria stepped back, letting Luna enter the bedroom she'd cleaned hundreds of times but never truly seen. The space was chaos. Clothes everywhere, empty pill bottles scattered on the nightstand, tissues covering every surface. "Tell me about David," Luna said, settling into the chair beside Victoria's bed. And for the first time in their lives, Victoria began to tell her the truth. Victoria sat on the edge of her bed, clutching Marcus's letter like a lifeline. Her hands shook as she began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "David Hamilton. I married him when I was 22, right out of college. He was everything Mom and Dad wanted for me. Old money family, Harvard MBA, connections to all the right people. The perfect society husband." Luna listened without judgment, something Victoria had never experienced from anyone in her family. For the first year, everything seemed wonderful. David was charming, attentive, generous with gifts and compliments. But he was also controlling in ways I didn't recognize at first. He'd suggest what I should wear, who I should be friends with, how I should spend my time. I thought it was romantic that he cared so much. Victoria paused, wiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. "The first time he hit me was 6 months after our wedding. I'd gotten home late from lunch with a college friend he didn't like. He said I was embarrassing him, making him look weak by disobeying his wishes." Luna's stomach clenched, but she remained silent, letting Victoria continue at her own pace. "He apologized afterward, brought me flowers, and promised it would never happen again. Said he was under stress at work, that I'd triggered his temper by being inconsiderate. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because admitting the truth would have meant admitting I'd made a terrible mistake." The bedroom door creaked open slightly, and Luna saw Preston and Celeste hovering in the hallway, listening. She caught their eyes and shook her head, silently telling them to give Victoria space. "The abuse got worse over the next 2 years. He never hit me where it would show, always places clothes would cover. He told me no one would believe me if I tried to tell anyone, that everyone saw him as this perfect gentleman. He was right. At dinner parties, at family gatherings, David was charming and attentive. People used to tell me how lucky I was to have such a devoted husband." Victoria stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her back to Luna as she continued talking. "I tried to leave him twice. The first time, I went to Mom. She told me that marriage required sacrifice, that all couples had problems, that I needed to work harder to make David happy. The second time, I went to Dad." Luna held her breath, dreading what came next. "Dad listened to everything I said. I showed him the bruises, told him about David threatening to kill me if I ever left him. I begged Dad to help me disappear, to use his money and connections to keep me safe. Victoria's voice broke completely. Dad said he would handle it discreetly, that he didn't want a messy divorce to damage the family's reputation. He offered to pay David off, negotiate some kind of settlement that would make the problem go away quietly. Luna felt rage building in her chest, not at Marcus, but at a system that had trained Victoria to accept that her safety was less important than social appearances. What happened? David took the money, $2 million, and agreed to an uncontested divorce. But before he signed the papers, he told me exactly what he'd do if I ever spoke publicly about our marriage. He had photos, recordings of our private conversations, documentation of every time I'd covered for him or lied to protect his reputation. He said he'd destroy me socially and financially if I ever told anyone the truth about what kind of man he really was. Victoria turned back to face Luna, her face streaked with tears, but her voice gaining strength. So I kept quiet, took the divorce settlement, moved to New York, and started taking pills to numb the panic attacks and nightmares. I told everyone David and I had simply grown apart, that it was an amicable split between two people who wanted different things. I became the perfect ex-wife, never bitter, never angry, always gracious when people asked about him. Luna stood and walked over to Victoria, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Victoria, none of that was your fault. Wasn't it? I chose to marry him. I chose to stay for 3 years. I chose to take money instead of fighting for justice. I chose pills over therapy, isolation over honesty. Every choice I've made since then has been about avoiding the truth of who I really am underneath all the pretense. Luna understood now why Marcus's letter had devastated Victoria so completely. Her father had known about David, had known about the abuse, and had still chosen to handle it with money instead of true protection. He'd enabled Victoria's silence, just as he'd enabled all of his children's dysfunction. What did Dad's letter say exactly? Victoria picked up the pages with shaking hands. He wrote that he regretted not handling David differently, that paying him off had been cowardice disguised as discretion. He said he should have helped me prosecute David, should have used his influence to make sure other women were protected from him instead of just making the problem go away quietly. Luna felt a chill run down her spine. Other women? David remarried 6 months after our divorce was finalized. His second wife lasted 2 years before she filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. His third wife died in what was officially ruled an accidental fall down the stairs of their beach house. The implications hung heavy in the air. David Hamilton wasn't just an abuser, he was potentially a killer, and Marcus's money had helped him escape consequences. Dad wrote that he'd been monitoring David ever since our divorce, that he suspected David's third wife's death wasn't accidental. He said his biggest regret wasn't the affair with your mother or the lies he'd told. It was letting David walk away with money instead of facing justice for what he'd done to me. Victoria sat back down on the bed, looking exhausted by the confession. There's more. Dad hired private investigators to build a case against David. 3 years of surveillance, financial records, interviews with hospital staff who'd treated his wives for suspicious injuries. He was planning to turn everything over to the FBI after his death. Luna's mind raced. Planning to? What happened to the investigation? Victoria pulled out another sheet of paper from the envelope. It's all being handled by a different law firm, one that specializes in criminal cases. Dad left instructions that the evidence should be turned over to federal prosecutors 1 week after the will reading. He wanted to give me time to decide whether I wanted to testify against David or remain anonymous. Luna stared at her half-sister, seeing her not as the entitled socialite she'd resented, but as a survivor of domestic violence who'd been carrying this trauma alone for over 20 years. Do you want to testify? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, there was something different in her expression, a strength Luna had never seen before.
Dad wrote that he failed me by not teaching me to fight for myself instead of accepting what I thought I deserved. He said watching me struggle with addiction while hiding from the truth had been torture for him, but he didn't know how to help me find my way back to the strong woman he remembered from before David destroyed my confidence.
Victoria stood up and walked to her dresser, pulling out a small wooden box Luna had dusted countless times but never opened. Inside were dozens of pill bottles, some current, some expired, representing years of prescription drug abuse. "I want to flush these down the toilet," Victoria said simply. "I want to check into rehab tomorrow morning. I want to testify against David and help make sure he never hurts another woman. And I want to learn how to be the person Dad believed I could become." Luna smiled through her own tears. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." As if drawn by some invisible signal, Preston and Celeste appeared in the doorway. "We heard everything," Preston said quietly. "Victoria, I'm sorry. We never knew." "I never let you know," Victoria replied. "I was so busy pretending to be perfect that I forgot how to be real." Celeste stepped forward tentatively. "If you're ready to stop pretending, so are we. Luna's right. We need to earn the right to be this family, instead of just assuming we deserve it." Luna looked around at the three people who were her siblings, seeing them clearly for the first time as complex individuals rather than caricatures of privilege. They were damaged, but they weren't beyond repair. "So tomorrow morning," Luna said, "we start building something better. All of us, together." Outside, the storm had completely cleared, and moonlight streamed through the bedroom windows, illuminating four people who were finally ready to stop running from the truth. 3 months later, Luna stood in the lobby of the Phoenix Community Recovery Center, watching Victoria lead a group therapy session through the glass walls of Conference Room B. Her half-sister looked nothing like the polished socialite who had once dismissed Luna as just the help. Victoria's hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, she wore jeans and a foundation t-shirt, and for the first time in decades, her smile looked genuine. The center was housed in a converted warehouse in downtown Phoenix, a deliberate choice Luna had made to serve the community where she'd grown up. The building buzzed with activity. Preston was in the financial literacy classroom, teaching a group of formerly homeless individuals about budgeting and credit repair, while Celeste worked with teenagers in the art therapy studio, helping them process trauma through creative expression. Hard to believe it's the same people, isn't it? Luna turned to find attorney Gerald Whitmore approaching, carrying a leather briefcase that had become familiar over the past few months as they'd navigated the legal complexities of restructuring the entire Caldwell fortune into a functioning foundation. "Sometimes I have to remind myself that Victoria used to complain about her manicure appointments lasting too long," Luna replied. "Now she's working 60-hour weeks and hasn't mentioned getting her nails done once." Through the window, they watched Victoria wrap up the session with what appeared to be a group hug. Several participants were crying, but they looked cathartic rather than devastated. "The FBI case concluded yesterday," Whitmer said quietly. "David Hamilton pled guilty to manslaughter in his third wife's death and aggravated assault charges related to his marriage to Victoria. He'll serve 15 to 20 years." Luna nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Victoria's courage in testifying had been the key to breaking the case, but Luna knew the emotional cost had been enormous. How's she handling it? Better than expected. Her therapist says that facing the truth about David, even publicly, has been more healing than 20 years of avoiding it. She's become something of an advocate for other domestic violence survivors. As if summoned by their conversation, Victoria emerged from the conference room, surrounded by several women who were clearly seeking her continued attention. She handled them with patience and genuine care, a far cry from the woman who used to duck out of charity events the moment the photos were taken. "Luna," Victoria called out, approaching a woman in her 40s who looked nervous but determined. "I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen. She's starting our transitional housing program next week." Luna shook Sarah's hand, noting the way Victoria stayed close enough to provide support without being overwhelming. This subtle awareness of other people's needs was perhaps the most dramatic change in Victoria's personality. "Sarah just left a 20-year marriage," Victoria explained. "She's got 3 kids and nowhere to go, but she's finally ready to start over." "We'll take good care of you," Luna promised Sarah, meaning it completely. The Foundation's transitional housing program had become one of their most successful initiatives, providing not just shelter, but comprehensive support for women escaping dangerous situations. After Sarah left with a housing coordinator, Victoria turned to Luna with an expression that had become familiar, part gratitude, part disbelief that her life had changed so dramatically.
The group asked me to speak at the State Domestic Violence Conference next month, Victoria said. 6 months ago, I couldn't say David's name out loud. Now I'm going to tell 500 people about surviving abuse. How do you feel about that? Terrified and excited in equal measure, but mostly proud that Dad's money is actually helping people instead of just making me feel important at charity galas where I never knew anyone's actual name. Preston appeared around the corner, looking harried but energized. His gambling addiction treatment had included a complete financial overhaul. All his assets were managed by the foundation's trustees, and he received a modest salary that covered his basic needs while preventing him from accumulating gambling funds. "We've got a problem," he announced, but he was smiling. "The financial literacy program has a 6-month waiting list. We need to hire 2 more counselors and find a bigger classroom." Luna laughed. "That's the kind of problem I love having." Preston had thrown himself into the financial counseling work with an intensity that surprised everyone, including himself. His personal experience with financial devastation made him uniquely qualified to help others avoid similar mistakes, and his natural charisma had found a positive outlet in education rather than manipulation. "I've been thinking about expanding into high schools," Preston continued, "teaching kids basic money management before they're old enough to destroy their credit. If I'd understood compound interest and debt ratios at 17, I might not have spent my 30s digging myself into holes." Celeste joined their impromptu family meeting, covered in paint and looking happier than Luna had ever seen her. The youth program had become Celeste's calling in ways none of them had anticipated. Her natural creativity, combined with genuine empathy that had been buried under years of performative social media presence, made her exceptionally good at connecting with troubled teenagers. "We have news too," Celeste announced. 3 of our kids just got accepted to college with full scholarships. Marcus Rivera, the kid who was living in his car 6 months ago, full ride to Arizona State for engineering. And Jenny Williams, who aged out of foster care last year, full scholarship to study social work. Luna felt tears welling up in her eyes. Marcus Rivera was named after their father. Not coincidentally, but because Luna had wanted to honor the man whose money was making these transformations possible. "Dad would be proud," she said softly. "He would be shocked," Victoria corrected with a laugh. 6 months ago, none of us could have imagined working this hard for other people's benefit. Whitmore cleared his throat diplomatically. "Speaking of your father, Luna, there's one final piece of business to address. The trust restructuring is complete, but there's something Marcus left specifically for this moment, a sealed letter to be opened only after the foundation had been operational for 3 months. He handed Luna an envelope that bore her name in Marcus's distinctive handwriting, along with a notation, "To be opened when my children have learned to be a family." Luna looked around at Victoria, Preston, and Celeste, 3 people who had started as strangers sharing only DNA and resentment, who had become genuine siblings through shared purpose and mutual support. "Should I read it aloud?" All 3 nodded, gathering around as Luna carefully opened the final message from their father. "My dearest children, if Luna is reading this to all of you together, then you've accomplished something I wasn't sure was possible. You've chosen to become better people not because you had to, but because you wanted to. Luna, you've proven what I suspected but couldn't be certain of, that blood alone doesn't make a family, but love and commitment do. You had every right to take the money and walk away from these 3 difficult people. Instead, you chose to save them, which tells me everything about your character. Victoria, Preston, Celeste, you've shown me that people can change, that privilege doesn't have to mean entitlement, that wealth can be a tool for healing rather than a barrier to growth. You've become the children I hoped you could be, but was afraid to demand you become." Whitmore cleared his throat diplomatically. "Speaking of your father, Luna, there's one final piece of business to address. The trust restructuring is complete, but there's something Marcus left specifically for this moment. A sealed letter to be opened only after the foundation had been operational for 3 months. He handed Luna an envelope that bore her name in Marcus's distinctive handwriting, along with a notation, "To be opened when my children have learned to be a family." Luna looked around at Victoria, Preston, and Celeste, three people who had started as strangers, sharing only DNA and resentment, who had become genuine siblings through shared purpose and mutual support. Should I read it aloud? All three nodded, gathering around as Luna carefully opened the final message from their father. My dearest children, if Luna is reading this to all of you together, then you've accomplished something I wasn't sure was possible. You've chosen to become better people, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. Luna, you've proven what I suspected but couldn't be certain of, that blood alone doesn't make a family, but love and commitment do. You had every right to take the money and walk away from these three difficult people. Instead, you chose to save them, which tells me everything about your character. Victoria, Preston, Celeste, you've shown me that people can change, that privilege doesn't have to mean entitlement, that wealth can be a tool for healing rather than a barrier to growth. You've become the children I hoped you could be, but was afraid to demand you become. There is one final gift I've saved for this moment. Luna, you'll find in the Foundation's accounts an additional $50 million that was held in trust pending the success of this experiment. It's yours to use as you see fit, but I suspect you'll use it to expand the work you're already doing. More importantly, I've had the family cemetery plot expanded. There are now spaces for all of you, your future families, your children, your grandchildren. You are all Caldwells now, not because of money or DNA, but because you've chosen to honor what that name could mean instead of what it used to mean. Live with purpose, love each other fiercely. And now that watching you become a real family has been the greatest joy of my life, even if I had to die to see it happen. All my love, Dad. The silence that followed was profound. Victoria was crying openly, Preston had his head in his hands, and Celeste was wiping tears from her cheeks while trying to maintain composure. 50 million more? Preston finally asked, his voice thick with emotion. That's not the important part, Luna said firmly. The important part is that he called us all his children, that he saw us become a family. Victoria stood up and walked to the window overlooking the busy street where the Foundation served hundreds of people every week. 6 months ago, I was taking 20 pills a day to avoid facing reality. Now I'm helping other people face theirs. I don't even recognize who I used to be. None of us do, Celeste added, but I like who we're becoming. Luna looked around at her siblings, her real siblings, forged through choice and effort rather than just genetics. The inheritance had never really been about money. It had been about transformation, about learning that worth couldn't be bought or inherited, only earned through service to others. Outside, the Phoenix sun was setting over a city full of people whose lives were being quietly changed by the Foundation, built on the ruins of the Caldwell family's dysfunction. Inside, 4 people who had started as strangers were planning their next steps as genuine partners in something bigger than any of them could have accomplished alone. Marcus Caldwell's final gamble had paid off beyond his wildest dreams. His children had learned to be worthy of their inheritance by learning to give it away. 1 year after that final letter, the Phoenix Community Recovery Center had expanded into 3 buildings and served over 2,000 people annually. Luna stood in her office, reviewing the quarterly impact reports that would have made any corporate executive proud. The numbers told an extraordinary story. 93% of their substance abuse program graduates remained clean after 12 months. 87% of their financial literacy participants had improved their credit scores by at least 200 points, and their youth program had achieved a 100% high school graduation rate. But the statistics didn't capture the human stories that made Luna's work meaningful. Like Rebecca Santos, a single mother who'd graduated from Victoria's program and was now studying to become an addiction counselor herself. Or Michael Park, who'd learned budgeting from Preston and had just opened his own small business selling handmade furniture.
or the dozens of teenagers who'd found their voices through Celeste's art therapy sessions and were now mentoring younger kids in the program. The foundation had also sparked changes beyond Phoenix. Victoria's testimony in the David Hamilton case had inspired other survivors to come forward, leading to a federal investigation that uncovered a network of wealthy men who'd been using their resources to silence abuse victims. The case had resulted in 17 additional arrests and the creation of new legal protections for domestic violence survivors. Preston's financial literacy curriculum had been adopted by school districts in 12 states, reaching over 50,000 students annually with practical money management skills. His personal story of recovery from gambling addiction had become a cornerstone of the program, showing young people that financial mistakes weren't permanent if addressed honestly and systematically. Celeste had published a book about using creative expression to process trauma, with all proceeds funding art therapy programs in underserved communities. She'd also started a mentorship network, connecting successful adults who'd aged out of foster care with current youth in the system, providing the kind of guidance she'd never received growing up. The siblings had individually become sought-after speakers and consultants, but they'd made a pact to always work as a team. Their shared experience of transformation from entitled children to dedicated advocates gave their message authenticity that resonated across economic and social boundaries. Luna's own journey had taken unexpected directions. Her master's degree in social work led to a doctoral program focused on family systems and generational wealth. Her dissertation research examined how sudden financial changes affected family dynamics, using her own family story as a primary case study, with full consent from her siblings. The research had attracted attention from universities, think tanks, and government agencies interested in understanding how wealth inheritance could be structured to promote social good rather than personal indulgence. Luna had been invited to testify before congressional committees about estate tax reform and inheritance policy, arguing that massive wealth transfers should include mandatory community service components. But perhaps the most significant change was the evolution of their personal relationships. Victoria had remarried 2 years after getting sober, not to another wealthy socialite, but to Dr. James Patterson, a trauma therapist who'd helped her process her experiences with David. Their wedding had been held in the foundation's main hall, surrounded by program participants, staff members, and the extended family they'd built through their work.
Preston had also found love, though in a completely unexpected way. Maria Santos, Luna's best friend, who'd become the foundation's operations director, had gradually become something much more important to Preston. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to the foundation's mission, rather than physical attraction or financial compatibility. Celeste remained single but had adopted 2 siblings from foster care, teenage brothers who'd been separated by the system and reunited through the foundation's advocacy work. Watching Celeste navigate parenthood with the same dedication she brought to her youth programs had been one of Luna's greatest joys. The family dinners at the mansion had evolved into weekly gatherings that included not just the 4 siblings, but their chosen family of staff members, program participants, and community leaders who'd become integral to their work. The formal dining room that had once showcased wealth and status now hosted strategy sessions, celebration dinners, and impromptu potlucks where everyone contributed according to their ability. Luna had kept her promise to honor her mother's memory. The Carmen Jimenez Memorial Scholarship provided full college funding for young women from immigrant families, ensuring that others wouldn't have to choose between education and financial survival the way Carmen had. The scholarship recipients often became foundation volunteers and eventually staff members, creating a cycle of opportunity and giving back that exemplified everything Marcus had hoped his money could accomplish. The mansion itself had been partially converted into transitional housing for families escaping domestic violence, with Victoria overseeing the program that provided both shelter and comprehensive support services. The bedrooms where entitled children had once plotted to claim their inheritance now housed mothers and children rebuilding their lives with dignity and hope. Gerald Whitmore had become more than their attorney. He'd become their advisor, advocate, and surrogate grandfather figure.
His law practice had evolved to focus exclusively on families navigating complex inheritance issues, using the Caldwell case as a template for how wealth transfers could be structured to promote personal growth and social responsibility. The foundation's success had attracted imitators, but none had achieved the same level of impact because they lacked the authentic transformation that made the Caldwell story compelling. Other wealthy families attempted to create similar programs, but without the genuine personal investment and lived experience that drove Luna and her siblings, their efforts remained superficial charity rather than systematic change. As Luna prepared to leave her office that evening, she reflected on how different her life had become from what she'd imagined as a 19-year-old stepping off a bus in Phoenix with nothing but determination and hope. She'd achieved financial security beyond her wildest dreams, but more importantly, she'd gained a family bound by purpose rather than just blood, and work that felt like calling rather than just employment. The journey from invisible domestic worker to respected social entrepreneur had been marked by countless moments of doubt, challenge, and growth. But standing in the office of an organization that had transformed thousands of lives while healing her own family's deepest wounds, Luna knew that Marcus Caldwell's unconventional inheritance had accomplished exactly what he'd intended. It had taught all of them that true wealth comes not from what you accumulate, but from what you contribute to the world around you. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.